Good evening and welcome to this edition of Toestanden. My name is Kopano Tuyana Maruga. I am a performance artist, writer, and culture worker, currently working here at Kuntakinte Island as a performance artist, writer, and culture worker. And before we continue, I want to give a heartfelt thank you for your patience, for waiting while we work out our technical issues. Maybe it's because Mercury is in Sagittarius, maybe it's because of the eclipse, I don't know. But I do know that we are here together finally, and I want to thank all of you at home for joining us. I want to thank the speakers, especially for their patience for waiting while we work out things in the studio. And most especially, I want to give a big thank you to the technical team who have worked everything out for us at the last minute. Thank you so much. And also to our guests joining us here in the studio today. We have a very different composition of Toestanden tonight. Usually you will see only me in the studio with the speakers. But tonight we're trying out a little something different. We're trying out a studio audience, so you will see here with us tonight some of our partners for Toestanden, representatives from Oikos Vezetwe, Graffiti Vezetwe, and some of our other partners who I will let you know about a little bit later. As I said before, my name is Kopano Tuyana Maruga. I'm a performance artist, writer, and culture worker. I work here at Kuntakinte as a curator and dramaturg. And Toestanden is a series of talks where we go into discussion around the themes and issues that are keeping us up at night. Toestanden is a partnership between Kuntakinte Island, Victoria Deluxe, Masareel Fonds, ACV Gent Eklo, Voom Vezetwe, Oikos Vezetwe, Hart Boven Hart, Gent, and Graffiti Vezetwe. And in this edition of Toestanden, we will be talking about the intersection between anti-racist movements and ecological movements and the overwhelming whiteness of the environmental movements that we see in the present day. As momentum builds behind both the global anti-racism, decolonization, and ecological justice movements, what begins to become quite apparent is the racial divide between these movements, where the anti-racism and decolonization movements tend to be foregrounded by racialized people, in other words, black, brown, and people of color. The ecological movement tends to be foregrounded by white people. Think of people like Greta Thunberg and Anuna de Wever. In this conversation, we are asking the question of why these movements appear this way and what we might be able to do to build further connections between them and perhaps clarify the ways in which they are interconnected and perhaps even one and the same. Our guests tonight are Malcolm Ferdinand, an environmental engineer from the University College of London, Susana Silva Morales, the president of the Indigenous Land Justice Movement, FABU, Mohammed Bari, social worker and activist at the intersection of environmentalism, Islam, and the fight for black liberation. Joining me in the studio is a representative from Oikos Vezetwe, Mira van der Meulen, on my right-hand side over here, who will be giving us the translation of Susana, as she is a Spanish speaker, and she will be doing the translation from Spanish into English. And joining us in
sorry, could you please speak a little bit slowly? I can't translate that quickly.
All right. So we've just heard from one of our translators, Melanie Zarate, who will be doing the English to Spanish translation from Glasgow for one of our speakers, Susana Silva Morales, who is joining us from Peru. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Our conversation is foreseen to go between 1 hour and 30 minutes and 2 hours. First, we will hear from each of our speakers for roughly 15 minutes each. And then the panel discussion will go ahead for about 30 minutes, followed by a Q&A of roughly 20 minutes. For the question and answer session, the questions, you can put them in the chat function, which you will find at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. You can put them directly into the question and answer function of the Zoom webinar, or they can be asked live in the studio here with us today. I ask you for the question and answer session, please put in your name, your pronouns, and who your question is directed to on our panel tonight. I will say that again. For the question and answer session, I will ask you to put in your name, your pronouns, and who your question is directed to of our panel tonight. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce one of our first speakers for tonight. Their name is Malcolm Ferdinand, an environmental engineer from the University College London. He has completed a PhD in political philosophy from Université Paris Diderot. He is now a researcher at the CNRS, University of Paris Dauphine, and at the crossroads of political philosophy, post-colonial theory, and political ecology. His research focuses on the Black Atlantic and particularly the Caribbean. he explores the relation between current ecological crises and the colonial history of modernity. He recently published a book based on his PhD dissertation entitled A Decolonial Ecology, Thinking from the Caribbean World. Hello, hello, Malcolm. Can you hear me? How are you doing? You better plug that book. Yes.
So hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
So thank you for inviting me to this panel, and thank you to everyone, and welcome and hello to Susanna and Mohamed and Melanie. So how do you want us to start? You want me to introduce some of the things that I've written in the book, or you already have specific questions you want to ask?
Yeah, it would be fantastic to hear from the perspective of your book, Decolonial Ecologies. You name a double fracture, and specifically, you're speaking about modernity's colonial and environmental double fracture. And I was wondering if you could take apart for us what you mean by this double fracture and some of the ideas that you present in your book, Decolonial Ecologies.
So, okay. So to start with, one of the things that I didn't say is the fact that I am from Martinique, and actually I am a Martinican. Martinique is a Caribbean island, and I was born and raised there. My family still live there, so this is just to give you a bit of a background as to where I'm speaking from. And actually, you will see that speaking from a place is a very important theme in my work. The story of the book that you mentioned, which just was just published in English, called Decolonial Ecology, Thinking from the Caribbean World, it starts there. And actually, this book is the English translation of a French book that I've written 2 years ago, that I've published 2 years ago, sorry. And growing up in Martinique, it's a small island, I was led to believe that there are, let's say I was confronted with two major questions, let's say. One was to do with living in the ruins or the legacy of slavery and colonialism. How does this manifest itself? It manifests itself with the relationships between people, the different positions of power, depending on whether you are black, white, or any other type of socio-racial categories. You see that a lot of people that are in power or that are in the administration represent the, let's say, the authority in the French state. Bear in mind, Martinique is still a non-sovereign territory. So these were some of the questions I have. How did it come to that? Why issues related with racism? Why some people are treated this way and not fairly, and so on and so forth. And on one other hand, I was confronted with another challenge. Living on an island is also realizing that the space that you inhabit, at least the ground space that territory that you inhabit, is limited. And so any type of environmental degradation very quickly takes a very important impact. And so I was being concerned with loss of biodiversity, with loss of agricultural land, with pollutions. And these were two interests. So on one hand, the legacy of colonialization, slavery, my heritage. On the other hand, ecological issues. But I was led to believe that these two questions, these two challenges, were to be thought of, addressed separately, that they would never intersect one another. And that separation is a first introduction into what I've called the double fracture of modernity. And it is indeed the start of my book, that separation. And that separation that I've highlighted from my background in Martinique, you can find it in so many different places. You can find it in universities. So you'd have, not today, but before, especially even in 2000, 2010s, you would have programs at universities that would study the history of the environment, the sociology of the environment, the philosophy of the environment. And in many of these courses, many of the intellectual production of what it means to preserve the earth, what it means to conserve territories, what it means to protect the environment. I found in my education in France, mainland France, I find that if I were engaging in ecological issues, I could not find ways to relate to this other pillar of modernity, that of the colonization, the slavery, the domination of indigenous peoples. And on the other hand, when I was attending other courses of the history of slavery, of the history of colonization, and even when I was engaging with some anti-racist groups, anti-racist organizations, the issue of the environment was somehow relegated to the background, especially Black anti-racist movements, they say. So I'm not talking about the indigenous peoples that you'd find in some places in France, like in Guyana, for example, or in New Caledonia. And what was answered to me at the time was the fact that ecological issues was, as you said, Kopano, was perceived to be a white issue, the concern of the privileged, the concern of the countries of the North, of the people that had already achieved some sort of material stability, that had already took care of some fundamental needs, the need to drink, the need to eat, and so on and so forth. But this is the trick, this is the divide, this is the factor that I want to overcome in my work. That's my starting point, and all of the rest of my book is trying to show how this divide is detrimental. It's detrimental because it prevents us, in a general us, to see how both of these are interrelated, and how basically what I'm saying is that you cannot achieve some form of post-colonial or even post-slavery emancipation if at the very same time you do not re-evaluate and change the way one relate to the earth, relate to the non-human environment and to the non-being. In fact, it can become counterproductive. And on the other hand, what I'm saying to the really long history of environmental thinkers from the 19th century till today, both thinkers and environmental organizations, what I'm saying to them is that you cannot effectively preserve the environment if at the same time you don't also address the kind of inequalities that have been used to destroy environments in the same place, especially with the racism, the colonial relation established with some countries and peoples in the South, and even poor people within the northern countries. Yeah, maybe that's a first point. So in the course of the book, I basically challenge this divide and challenge those that would say, hey, Malcolm, ecology is a white person term. And I answer that this is what you have been led to believe. And I offer propositions to kind of reclaim that term and give a different type of answers basically showing that there are different voices of ecology. Greta Thunberg is an important one, of course, but there has been many before her, and there will be many after her, and there are many even at the same time. And that there has been an exclusion of some of his voices historically. And I think maybe Mohamed Barry will tell a bit more about that, maybe Susanna as well. But what I've noticed that in the past couple of years, you can see even more and more of his voices right here in Europe. And that is very, very interesting.
Thank you, Malcolm. I think that was a mouthful and then some. Thank you so much for the rigor of that answer. I'm wondering for you, because you locate specifically in terms of time, in terms of history, the period of modernity. And I wonder, especially for our viewers at home, can you locate what it is that you mean specifically by modernity and how modernity has resonances for our present temporal period?
Yeah, so I will not go into defining modernity, but I would say that 1492 has been both politically and geographically an important event. So 1492 is the time when the Europeans, especially via Christopher Columbus, land in the Caribbean, basically, with the pretense that they discovered the Americas. But this moment was important not because of the claims of discovery, but because it created a knot. It tied together the Earth into a globe, okay? And that's, for many scholars, the start of the globalization. That means the start of the understanding of the Earth as one and finite entity, basically, you know. But it's also something else. It's not necessarily the start, because for some it started in 1450, extra, but it's also the increase of a certain type of relationships between white male Europeans and non-white male peoples around the world, whether they are indigenous peoples like the Tainos of so-called of Haiti today, whether it was the relationship with the people in South America or the so-called Native Americans of the United States. And again, these ongoing colonizations of the Americas, and then in the 19th century of Africa and Asia. For many people, this has been understood as only the subjugation of people. That means the domination of people. Of course, we now know that this was also the start of major ecological damages, ecological destructions, because the goal at the time was to exploit the land and the human beings, to make profit out of it as quickly as possible, and to take that profit and bring it back to Europe. Now, what I'm trying to say with this modernity time frame is that it's not just the domination of people, it's not just the destruction of the environment, it's the imposition of a colonial way of inhabiting the earth. And that colonial way, that what I call this colonial inhabitation, it's almost like a philosophical view of what it means to be on earth and how you should relate with the spirits, the beings, the trees, the rivers. And it's a very violent, misogynistic, patriarchal way and slave-making way of inhabiting the earth. And that way, in what I argue, has also been enhanced with capitalism later, enhanced with the Industrial Revolution. And it is this way that even though some people have achieved independence, have achieved this abolition of slavery, have achieved some form of emancipation. That way needs to be changed as well. And going back to Martinique, where I come from and I live until I was 18, all of the island, or most of the islands, is really a puzzle of plantations. That is a manifestation of the colonial inhabitation. And these plantations, so in the 18th century, there were plantations of sugarcanes, cotton, coffee. Today, you still have some sugarcane plantation, you still have some banana plantations, but the philosophy still remains the same. Let's take as much as we can from the land as quickly as possible, make as much profit as possible, regardless of the consequences, both on the health of the ecosystems and on the health of the people. And this is really a modern construct, a modernist construct, this colonial way of inhabiting the land. And I've been trying to see the persistence of that way. Kopano, if you don't stop me, I can carry on. So,
Thank you, Malcolm. Yeah. Thank you for stopping yourself. We appreciate that. I don't think anyone was yet done listening to you, but we'll definitely be able to hear more from you later in the conversation. So thank you so much for that rigorous answer. At this moment, I would like to pivot to our second speaker for the evening, Susana Silva Morales. Susana Silva Morales is president of the Ashinanka Federation FABU, Federación Ashinanka del Bayo Urumbamba, in the Peruvian Amazon province of Atalaya in the department of Ucayali. As the daughter of Bernardo Silva, one of the first activists for the defense of their ancestral territories who freed his Ashinanka brothers and sisters from slavery in the 1980s, she continues this work. Susana is dedicated to the defense of their ancestral territories and nature. Her objective is that all indigenous communities obtain land titles so that they conserve the forests and keep the harmonious relationship with our Mother Nature alive from generation to generation. Susana has been elected Ambassador of Universal Peace by the UPF, the Universal Peace Federation, an organization affiliated to the United Nations. To her, having titled healthy areas is a symbol of peace. With FABU, she is currently working for land titles for the community in Chatoshi, Guardians del Bosque, protectors of the forest, where landless Ashinanka from the regions of, or families from overpopulated communities can settle. In this way, they also want to secure this large area of land for future generations. They want to protect the forest and provide a buffer for the Ilsara Nature Reserve, where indigenous groups live in isolation. Hello, Susana. Can you tell us how you are and where you are calling in from?
Tardes, hermanos todos que me están mirando. Aquí Silva Morales, soy Asháninka, presidente de la Federación Asháninka Bajurbamba, que nos encontramos en la ciudad de Atalaya, en los ríos de Raimondi y Cepagua, se encuentran nuestras comunidades nativas. Todas somos del pueblo Asháninka. Tengo ese gran honor, ese privilegio de dirigir a las comunidades nativas en nuestro ámbito y también quiero compartir con ustedes toda nuestra experiencia, un poco de historia, nuestra lucha y nuestros sueños. Nosotros como pueblos originarios hemos vivido en la Amazonía peruana hace más de 15.000 años atrás, antes que nuestro Perú sea pues un país independiente, democrático, que hace poco hemos cumplido 200 años de vida republicana. Nosotros como pueblos originarios ya vivimos en nuestra Amazonía y lo hemos conservado nuestros bosques tal como nos han enseñado nuestros ancestros. Tenemos un respeto único, un respeto profundo a nuestros bosques, para nosotros nuestra madre naturaleza. Allí se encuentran los recursos para la alimentación, también la medicina, cuando nos enfermamos, se encuentran allí. También las hojas para la construcción de nuestras vidas, los árboles también nos sirve para poder tener nuestras casas sanas, y también la parte espiritual donde están los sagrados, los cerros sagrados, las y espacios territoriales muy sagrados, donde ahí están los espíritus que nos dan energías positivas, que nos cuidan. Que nosotros como Ashaninka siempre lo
Susanna,
hemos
I'm going to
respetado,
interrupt you
lo
there
hemos
so that
amado.
maybe Mira
Sabemos
has a moment to
quererlos,
translate for
amarlos,
us.
porque ellos son espíritus que nos dan la fuerza y nos dan todo. Entonces,
Susanna?
en los años 80 hemos estado luchando para poder conseguir la titulación de nuestras comunidades nativas. Sin embargo, a la fecha, a la actualidad, no todas están tituladas. Son comunidades nativas de las cuales
Susanna,
10 están tituladas.
I'm going to interrupt you
y
there
las
so that
demás
Mira has a
están
moment to
en
translate for us.
¿Por qué queremos que el gobierno peruano nos entregue los títulos?
Susana, un segundo,
Porque queremos
un segundo.
garantizar
Disculpa por interrumpirte.
la
¿Me escuchas?
conservación de los bosques. Cuanto más de bosque, más grande territorio tengamos, más bosques podemos seguir conservándola, protegiéndola y asegurando que los árboles nos entreguen el oxígeno limpio y el agua dulce para nosotros que vivimos aquí en la zona, en nuestras comunidades, para los que viven en las ciudades, también para el mundo entero, porque el oxígeno va a volar, va a ir de países en países y va a llegar hasta el lugar donde ustedes se encuentran y van a poder respirar aire limpio, aire sano. Y es muy importante para
Susana,
nosotros que exista la
can you give Mira a moment to
de
translate?
comunidades nativas, porque va a garantizar la conservación de los bosques. Sin la titulación de las comunidades nativas no podemos seguir contribuyendo como lo hemos hecho hace más de 1000 años aquí en nuestra Amazonía. Si aquí puedo parar y puedo traducir o puedo continuar, me indican, por favor.
Sí, sí, gracias Susana. Bueno, ya, la próxima vez dame un poco más... bueno, buenas, yeah. So, good evening everyone. My name is Susana Silva Morales. I am of the Ashaninka people from the Federation FABU, Federación Ashaninka of the Lower Urubamba River. I live in Atalaya, district of Raimondi, in the province of Sepawa. With my federation, I lead 18 native communities, which are all Ashaninka. So for me, it is a big honor to lead these communities. And now I want to share with you a bit of our experience, our fights, and our dreams. With our communities, with the Ashaninka people, we have lived in the Amazon since more than 15,000 years. Before Peru was even a country, because Peru does not exist. I don't know exactly how long, but it's not so long. 200 years, yeah. So we already lived here when Peru was founded, and we cared for our forest. Oh, sorry. So we cared for our forest just as our ancestors taught us. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we were always taught to respect our Mother Earth. We find everything there. We find our food, we find our medicine, we find the trees of which we use the leaves to build our houses. And we also find our spiritual teachers, our spiritual, like the sacred spaces, the valleys which are sacred for us. This is where the spirits are, which give us good energy. And then in the 1980s, we finally ended slavery here, and we started obtaining land titles for our territories, but not all territories were titled, so there remain a lot of empty spaces which were not titled. And we actually, as Ashaninka, we need very large territories because we also move around, we change our fields every year. So the more territory we have, the better. But nowadays, everything is filled up. We only have a small space in our communities. And the larger our territories are, the more we can protect our forest. We protect our forest for our own communities, for the Ashaninka people, but we do this also for the people in the city and actually for the whole earth. Ok, Susana, puedes seguir, pero habla un poquito más cortito si quieres. Gracias.
Thank you, Susana, and thank you, Mira.
Gracias, gracias, hermanos. Bueno, continuando. Nosotros, como pueblos originarios, estamos preocupados porque en estos últimos tiempos en nuestra provincia de Atalaya llegaron los invasores que vienen de otros lugares de la sierra y de la costa, de otras partes, que no tienen buenos pensamientos. Ellos vienen a destruir, a arrasar con todos los bosques que tenemos aquí en nuestra Amazonía. No respetan los espacios ancestrales que están siendo peticionadas para la titulación de las comunidades nativas que aún no tienen el título. Ellos, por encima de estos espacios territoriales, están pidiendo títulos al gobierno peruano, especialmente al Ministerio de Agricultura. Los invasores son traficantes de tierras, son narcotraficantes, son taladores de madera ilegal. Ellos no respetan, tienen mucha plata, tienen influencia política, viajan constantemente de Atalaya a la ciudad de Pucallpa, a Lima, en avión, tienen mucho dinero y están comprando conciencias, hay mucha corrupción en Atalaya, en Ucayali, en el gobierno peruano. Los funcionarios no están cumpliendo su función de un trabajo transparente. Ellos prefieren recibir dinero sucio para dar las tierras a los traficantes de tierra y luego depredar, destruir todos los bosques y toda la vida que existe en ella. Es nuestro peligro más grande. Ahorita se encuentran nuestras Amazonías acá en Atalaya, nuestros territorios están en peligro. Es grave la situación, lo que está sucediendo ahora en Atalaya. La titulación de comunidades nativas tiene que ser entregada a las comunidades nativas originarias de la zona para garantizar una verdadera conservación de bosques. No se puede entregar títulos extraños a depredadores, de ninguna manera. Nosotros estamos muy indignados, muy molestos y estamos haciéndole la bulla al Ministerio de Agricultura para que deje entregar la titulación a estas comunidades fantasmas, a estas comunidades con de traficar tierra, y no nos vamos a quedar tranquilos hasta que nos entreguen la titulación a los verdaderos pueblos originarios. En ese sentido, aquí vamos a pedirle a ustedes nos ayuden a difundir este trato, este atropello de derecho que se está dando hoy en día a los pueblos originarios de la provincia de Atalaya. Y vamos a tener que difundir para que el Ministerio de Agricultura entregue la titulación a los pueblos originarios ancestrales, que va a conservar, que va a garantizar el verdadero conservación de los. Y también lo que se debe tener en cuenta es que a través del Estado no una garantía que realmente se va a dar la conservación de bosques, porque hay mucho discriminación, hay mucho racismo por parte de los funcionarios al momento cuando los jefes de las comunidades nativas van a gestionar sus titulaciones. Ellos saben decir, ¿para qué ustedes quieren territorios si ustedes ya tienen el espacio y encima no saben trabajar, ¿no? Ahí para darnos cuenta nosotros que los funcionarios, el gobierno, las entidades públicas tienen un pensamiento lucrativo, un pensamiento materialista, un pensamiento individualista y comerciante, mientras que nosotros, los pueblos originarios, tenemos un pensamiento natural de lo que es conservar, proteger, querer, amar.
Susana,
a los bosques, nosotros lo
Susana,
vemos
I'm going to stop you there so that Mira
familia,
has a moment to translate.
hermanos. No sé si hasta acá me están escuchando. ¿Puedo continuar o paralizar?
Paralizar para traducir.
Ya, está bien.
Gracias. Está bien. So we are very worried because in these last years in Atalaya, invaders have arrived. They come from elsewhere. They come from the mountains, from the coast, and they come with bad intentions. They come to destroy our forest, the Amazon forest. They disrespect our territories because not all the territories are titled, and if they don't have a title, they are not protected. So these people, they arrive and they solicit titles, land titles, over our territories. But in fact, they are land traffickers, they are drug traffickers and wood traffickers. They have a lot of money and political influence, so the whole system is very corrupt. They pretend to be native communities, while in fact they are not. They buy people over, so there is a lot of corruption in our region, and the politicians, they choose to work for money instead of for what is just. These people, they come, they destroy all the forest and the life in it. So this means that our lands, our territories are endangered. It is very dangerous for us, and this is why we demand land titling. Land titling is very important to conserve our forests and our territories. So the government, they should give land titles to who deserve the land titles, the original peoples of these territories, and not to the people which will plant coca, for example. So we are very angry, and this is why we demand these land titles, and we will not stay quiet until they give us these land titles. And this is also why we ask international support and why we want this issue to be seen. Another problem is discrimination and racism, because if an indigenous leader goes to the government and asks for a land title, the first thing they would say is, why do you want so much land if you don't even know how to use it? They often think that indigenous peoples are lazy because they don't have the same productive use of the land, because they don't plant monocultures, and this is often the first question which is asked, because the system is very individualist, so the people who come to try to get this land, they have a very individualistic mindset, whereas we as indigenous peoples, we think more, as a whole, we think more of nature and how to protect nature. Yeah.
Voilà. Merci.
How much time does she still?
Roughly 5 minutes, so she can keep going.
Sí, Susana, ¿puedes seguir? Gracias. Tienes 5 minutos más. 3 minutos, digamos.
Tenemos 60.000 hectáreas de territorios titulados en 10 comunidades nativas. Restantes, para titular, nos falta 540.000 hectáreas. La comunidad más grande también de titulación se llama Inchatoshi, Guardianes de los Bosques. El sueño, para que nos entreguen el título, la cantidad de territorio es 470.000 hectáreas. Es un sueño del pueblo ashanka que queremos conseguirla con la finalidad de que vamos a asegurar la conservación de los bosques, mantener viva nuestra cultura ashánica, proteger la vida de los no contactados. Son personas ashanin indígenas como nosotros que no se han contactado con las ciudades, y ellos se llaman mashcopiros, son nuestros vecinos, con ellos colindamos, tenemos que proteger la vida de ellos, que necesitan mucha ayuda, están solos, abandonados y amenazados por madereros ilegales, entre otros. Y nosotros, como comunidad Inchatoshi, Guardianes de los Bosques, se crea para hacer que nuestra conservación de bosques se haga realidad. Y es por eso que seguimos en lucha ante el Ministerio para que nos entreguen el título. Ya tenemos hasta el momento la resolución de reconocimiento. Nos falta ahora los siguientes pasos, que son la resolución de plano y entrega de los títulos. Es un costo muy elevado y el Ministerio de Agricultura lo único que sabe decir que no tiene presupuesto. Entonces estamos tocando puertas para que nos ayuden con el financiamiento y conseguir un fondo para que les titulen todas las comunidades pendientes y hacer realidad nuestros 540,000 hectáreas que está pendiente para la titulación. Y entonces, lo que a ustedes, hermanos, ayúdenos a difundir nuestra problemática y el gobierno peruano entienda, comprenda por qué nosotros, los pueblos originarios, queremos la titulación para conservar bosques. Es una conservación garantizada en manos de nosotros. Y si le damos la titulación a los narcotraficantes o traficantes de garantiza la destrucción del bosque y también perjudica la vida para nuestro planeta. Y nosotros no queremos eso. Estamos pidiendo titulación para nuestras comunidades verdaderas, para nuestras comunidades originarias que estamos acá en la Amazonía peruana. Y es lo que yo puedo pedirles en esta manera y también agradecerles a Miraj, que me ha invitado a este evento tan bonito, tan especial para nosotros. También es una oportunidad en que nos conozcan y también saludo a al hermano que ha hecho el libro donde habla sobre el colonialismo y también habla sobre cómo hay un racismo, cómo la lucha para cuidar el medio ambiente, ¿no? En la cual nosotros lo vemos muy bueno ese libro, hay que difundirla, nos haga llegar para poder leer y difundir, transmitir también acá a nuestros hermanos ashánicas. Y de esa manera el mundo entero ayude a tomar conciencia. Más bien, yo quedo muy agradecida. Cualquier cosa, estoy ya a seguir informando, comunicándonos. De manera,
Susana,
mi federación, mi
I'm going to
espacio
stop you
donde
there
yo
so
vivo.
that Mira can
Muchas
translate for
gracias.
us. Thank you.
Gracias, Susana. Okay, so at this moment, we have 70,000 hectares of titled communities in 10 communities in total. And we have communities with 40,000 hectares which have no title yet. So their land is not safe, in fact. And at this moment, we are actually requesting title for the community of Inchatoshi Guardianes del Bosque, which means guardians of the forest. And for this community, we solicit 470,000 hectares. It is a dream of the Ashaninka people to obtain this land so that we can protect our forests and also keep this for the upcoming generations. This is also to protect uncontacted people, such as the Mashkupiros. They are our brothers and sisters, but they are not contacted yet, so they live uncontacted, and they are very vulnerable, and this is why we need to protect them. And we create this community to protect this whole area. And this is what we are fighting for now with FABU. We have already obtained the recognition, but we did not obtain the title yet. The Ministry of Agriculture, they only say that they don't have the budget. And this has also been the problem in the past. There is never a budget for land titling. It has never been paid by the government, but only by international cooperation in the past. So this is also why she's also happy to be on this panel, because she hopes to get more attention for her problem as well, because funding is the biggest problem. And she also wants this message to reach her own government so that they understand their needs, because they do not want this fight anymore. They want protected territories. Yeah. So she just wants to spread this message. She's also very grateful for this platform to be in this panel, so that we can all hear about the story of her people, the Ashaninka people. And yeah, she's very happy that she can be here, that we can hear her story, her experience. She also thanks Malcolm, our brother, who wrote the book, and she hopes that everyone can read the book, including her Ashaninka brothers and sisters, and she hopes that the whole world soon will know about these existing problems, because they exist everywhere. And she thanks us all. Gracias, Susana.
Thank you, Mira. Muchas gracias, Susana. And for those who are sitting at home who are wanting to know a little bit more about the case that Susanne is outlining for us, you can read an article by our own Mira van der Meulen on mo.be, where she details some of the issues that Susanne has detailed for us tonight. So if you want to read a little bit more of that, go to mo.be, type in the search function Mira van der Meulen, and you will find a little bit more about some of the issues that Susanne is raising for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Susanne. Muchas gracias. And with that, I would like to move on to our third speaker for the night, Mohammed Bari. Mohammed Bari is a social worker and recently moved to Cambridge to pursue a Master of Arts. And as a community organizer, Mohammed is part of Green Deen Vezetwe, an Islamic-inspired environmental organization. Next to this, Mohammed has been at the foundation of AYO, Black History Month Belgium, and the Department of Football Club City Pirates. As a vegan, Mohammed enters the conversation an urgent need to transform our way of life via the lens of being Muslim, Black diaspora in the West, looking back at the costs of westernized living on people and planet happening now. He is driven by his passion for social justice and aims to strengthen, defend, motivate, develop, and encourage the resilience of people affected by social disadvantages through his projects, writing, and public speaking. Hello, Mohammed. Where are you joining us from, and how are you doing tonight, or today, this morning, this afternoon?
It's 3:27 p.m. out here.
Sweet.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honestly a bit emotional because of because we're now in Cambridge, and for the first time in my life, subhanAllah, it's like walking around here, you have the feeling of what it means to be walking on stolen land. And like just the idea and the concept of, oh wow, this actually used to be someone else's land. And those people are not here at this moment, or they're being marginalized. And you just look around and you see a lot of beauty, and still that beauty is so much tainted with like colonialism, imperial power, racism. Because my wife, who's doing her PhD here at Harvard, actually, because of her, I'm able to enter certain Harvard spaces and just meet and talk to people. And one of the conversations, or one of the events happening was on Indigenous Peoples Day. We went out to see a manifestation of Indigenous students who are basically attending Harvard, which is built on the land of the Massachusetts Indigenous people's land. So it was surreal. And then listening to Susanne just tied those two things together again, as in how Harvard was built so many years ago, and what's happening in the reality she is living right now, just strikes me very hard. So yeah, hearing her speak really did something to me.
Thank you for sharing that, Mohammed. And I mean, I think it's quite interesting because, I mean, you're now in the United States, in Massachusetts, you come from Belgium, we are on the doorstep of so-called Thanksgiving, which is actually a celebration of the massacre of indigenous peoples on Turtle Island or North America. And I'm wondering for you, how do you position yourself within that triangulation, being someone of the African diaspora, coming from Belgium, now being in North America, coming from the position of, like you say in your biography, being a vegan, working with Green Deen Vezetwe. How do you position yourself at the moment within that triangulation?
It's been one of trial and error, I think, because I'm still filling the space. It's like I'm in a role of an observant, honestly. So I can observe what's going on. I can attend meetings and rallies in solidarity and in support, but I don't feel like I have the tools yet to engage. So it's been one in just learning, literally detaching myself for a bit from theories, but just attaching myself to reality, and then taking the space again back home and just going through the emotions of like reality and text, and then I hope somewhere towards the all these experiences I'm able to like form a sense of a groundedness here, to be able to feel like, okay, how do I interact or how don't I interact with certain traditions happening here, because obviously you know the history sometimes, but it's interesting when you're able to live in a place close enough to know what it is.
And you are specifically working in or coming from the background of being a social worker, working in the non-profit industry. And I'm wondering for you, working with Green Dean, working with VUM, at the intersection of religion, specifically Islam, and environmentalism, how has that intersection manifested for you? What kind of projects have you worked on? What kind of manifestations, movements have you been a part of that intersection of Islam and environmentalism?
I think it's I like a PowerPoint up, but I'm not sure if I'm able to project it at the moment.
Regarding the PowerPoint, if you want to share your screen, we'll be able to see it that way.
Let me see. I think someone has to make me co-host, because I have it open here. It would be fun. It would be a better way to channel in, because I think that would give people an idea of, because yeah, obviously I was not born and raised in Belgium. I think a bit like Malcolm, just like entering a space where you were never part of is a very interesting entry point, because it actually helps you understand where you're coming from better sometimes. And let me see if I can put up the PowerPoint. I think I sent it again via mail.
Yep. Well, what I think we can do is we can come back to this a little bit later during the panel discussion. And hopefully during that time, the technical team will be able to make you a co-host.
But it's okay. I can definitely enter it even without the PowerPoint. So like I was saying, I was born in Sierra Leone, and I was raised from like this perspective of just being really grounded, like just being able to see what a farm is, what food growing is, how you go to the farm and get your own food, and just being very close to your food. And it was never this disconnect with what you're eating and how it's being grown. And then being like 11, 12, I started noticing a few interesting things I did not at the time could not put together. So I remember because Sierra Leone is really located close to the Atlantic Ocean. So we used to go and swim like at the shores of the Atlantic. So you could like stay safe, but still be able to see the Atlantic for like a bit. And we used to see like boats, just like random boats being there. We didn't know what they were. But later on, it was like, oh, those boats had like flags. And once I started realizing the colors of those flags, it was like Russian flags, Norwegian flags. So what they were basically doing is like coming into like Sierra Leonean territory and basically taking away all the fish. So yeah, they would basically take away the fish, but I did not know that. We just knew there were boats that were coming there and they were doing something. And then fast forward, so like me being in Belgium and really getting engaged into like anti-racism and on my way to becoming like vegetarian, vegan, I was really interested in the like climate movements. And then I was actually gonna go with the Climat Express in like 2015 to Paris during like the whole COP in Paris. But unfortunately, that year was a lot of things happened and we were not advised to go down there. So there was like an alternative protest held in Ostende. And I remember like trying to get friends to go with me, especially black friends. And they were like, yeah, nah, we're not going. So I was like, either way, yeah, I'm going. I just want to be there and experience this. Um, but yeah, it was this thing where I was in the train. So it really started like this. Just imagine a black kid in this huge group, but nearly all white. And then you enter the train, you come into Ostende, and you feel like people are protesting something, and you start reading, and then all you're seeing is like save the dolphins, save the, just like save a bunch of animals from extinction. So that felt very odd for me because I was like, huh, I get it, but where are the other things like the people that are already dying now? But I kind of like skipped it out of my head. We did this whole walk and came back in. And during that entire walk, I could just feel like this weird twist because at a certain point, there was like this guy dressed in colonial Pete, like Zwarte Piet, who was sharing like candy and being very jolly. Um, I'm gonna I can present you my PowerPoint, so we're gonna just go into that.
Gorgeous. Take us there.
You guys can see my screen, all right?
Almost.
And now?
Now we can see it.
Okay, perfect.
It's a bit annotated, but we can see the most important information. There it is.
Okay. So I think the title, I was playing with like home is best protected, protested here. Here meaning like in the heart of the colonial empires. And towards the end, I'll tell you where and how I came up with that. So like I was saying, I was born in Sierra Leone. This is me in 1997, smiling. So as you can see, kid. And as I said, Sierra Leone is literally Atlantic Ocean, beautiful, beautiful settings, hills, ocean. But also being from West Africa, like the first implementations of like me being aware of what was going on was like looking back and calling back family, but also visiting what they now call the Kuntakinte Island, or islands, sorry, in the Gambia. As you can see on the map, like the middle frame is like how big the territory actually was in its colonial days. But on the right is like, you can see the water just swallowing the entire island. So this was like a photo from when we went there in 2018 with Ami, like my wife who's from the Gambia herself. So for me, now flashback to that story of me being in Ostende and seeing people say protect the whales, protect the whatever, I was just thinking to myself like, okay, as a vegan, I am for animal protection, I am for animal rights, but as a Black person, I feel completely erased because I don't see anything protesting the rights for the cultures of Black people, of indigenous people, and their spaces. It just feels like this very hollow message of like protect animals and red onze toekomst, like save our future. That was the one that really got me. Because I was like, whose future are you talking about? There are people dying right now. There are people losing livelihood. There's cultural loss. So that was really the moment I really kind of stepped all the way out of like trying to enter that white environmental space, because it became very clear for me that these people were not trying to protect the same things as I was trying to protect. They were using a language that was completely annihilating me and in my experience, and thus everyone that looks like me and everyone that's indigenous. So yeah, just like quick figures, like coastal erosion alone cost the African continent like 3.8 billion US dollars a year. And this is like data from like the World Bank, like an institution I don't per se trust, but if they already say it, then it must mean something. But like I said, it's like this, you could just sense like people talking and what I was experiencing and what I was researching from like a perspective of someone living on the continent or somewhere else. It's very, there was no 2030, 2050 talk. It was like tomorrow, am I able to live in the same house at the end of the year? So that really, for me, was what got me thinking of alternative ways of entering the whole climate conversation. Because I was seeing how this whole movement, and especially like the climate being changed in these regions, was already forcing people out of their regions, out of their homes, creating like these million cities in which people actually don't really want to come to the city, but embedded with like structural capitalistic ways and tendencies of like, yeah, let's just all grow the same crops and start selling it, meaning you literally are killing the land, as Susanna was saying. So you have this monolithic way of like, we only do corn in this region, we only do this in this region. And as I was saying, I grew up with, if I go to the farmyard, you had potato, maize, cassava, mango trees. You could literally have a very huge variety of just what people locally needed and wanted to eat. And at the very end of this is the tension of creating cities like that also means fostering wars, as we are seeing in the Sahel region, as we're seeing in certain regions in Nigeria. People, when there's a scarcity in resources, people start to fight over those resources. So that's part of it. And then, so as I entered that space, as I was telling you, I was thinking I needed a new way of looking at climate. I needed a new way of holding myself as part of the conversation without feeling aligned with people that I was like, I feel a disconnect here. So I started looking at these other ways of like just entering this climate perspective. So alhamdulillah, like meeting the women of the Grindin, especially also just talking to my wife, we started just researching alternative, and then Grindin was something, because we were thinking about creating something ourselves. And then I remembered like a few years ago, Yasmina Akandaf and others had an organization, but I did not know if it was still existing. So we reached back to them, and we were really happy to like renew the vibe in the group. But Yasmina is coming to you on another moment, so she will dive into Grindin a bit more. But the concept of Grindin really stems from an Islamic perspective of we were put on earth as stewards of earth. We were not sent here to pollute and extract and just completely like do unjust to what the creation was from God. So we have a duty as Muslims to preserve nature, to take care of nature, because nature is always taking care of us as a blessing from the Creator. So this is a very profound spiritual entry point into interaction with everything around you, which is not only about numbers and future and all of that matters, all of that science matter, but from like a very profound way of how you're connected to the earth and how the earth is connected to you. So that has been like something that helped me to feel very much grounded and empowered to enter the space of like climate conversations. And this is like a bit of like the mission statement of Grindin, but hence Yasmina is coming. I think she will dive into that. But it's about how we as Muslims can impact and influence first other Muslims, and then indirect everyone else following our page and what we do. It's like really to like create awareness, really help remind Muslims of their duty as Muslims to take care of the earth and not like get tied up in this whole capitalistic wet dream of mass production, overconsumption, etc., etc. And lastly, coming into the point of what I then call the divide is how this position in Belgium definitely, like the climate groups and the anti-racism groups, has been one in which there is no clear link. So what this means is anti-racism groups usually start from like people that are disenfranchised in society, and climate groups usually tend to start from middle class, upper middle class people. So that means there's already a societal, socioeconomical disconnect. And in this case, one would think that those that are a bit more privileged would step down and just level to meet people where they are, because as we've seen, climate groups and environmental groups in Belgium have been able to mobilize 3, 4, 5, 6 times as much as anti-racism groups, because of like the access to power, the access to resources, speaking the same language as the government, not being very threatening because it's all peace and love at times. So they have much more space to play, they have much more space to do whatever they want, even though as they're fighting injustice, they're still allowed a certain margin to like exercise your rights. As for anti-racism groups, the moment you step out of the frame the government wants you to, we all know what have happened in the past. So I think those groups need to go down and go local, enter into what are anti-racism groups facing, and that for me has been the issue with like language, like I was saying, the overly committed to animals, futurism, and science is all valid, but it's not valid if you're black and brown. It's not valid if you're coming from countries like I do, where maybe like certain places where I, as a kid, 10, 15, 16 years ago played are not going to exist in 3, 4, 5 years. So for me, climate is not like this distant future thing. It's something that's already impacting where I'm from and the people that I call family are living in right now. Mm-hmm. So, and then on the other hand, it's about how I think climate groups have willingly participated in this media framing of what Malcolm was already saying, like this disconnect of who is representing us when it comes to climate. Yeah, Greta and Una doing an applaudable job, but there have always been other, even in Belgium, there have always been other youngsters, kids in their age brackets that were protesting the same things. But it's very clear that media always prioritize certain people that are put forward. So I think it's upon, I think when it comes to like Vanessa and Greta, Greta and others have really done a good job at pushing her forward, because I can see there's been some type of a relationship being built there. So you can see like the way Vanessa has been pushed forward by Greta, and then just realizing what structural racism means and the erosion of indigenous and black voices in these topics. So I think the Belgian climate groups need to go back to ground zero and find a way to enter conversations with anti-racism groups from a space of humbleness and realizing the space they already hold, and not from like this perspective of we're going to try and convert all of y'all to veganism and your cultures and your traditions or this and that. That's like where usually the disconnect comes in, from that perspective of language. And I think from like speaking directly to like black and brown people, I think we need to find ways when we talk about decolonization, for instance, that we do the work ourselves, because sometimes we are so into this whole neoliberal capitalism way of living that we actually reproduce these forms of oppression towards Earth, towards our own nations, by the behaviors we actually get into in European nations. And that's where this is the final place I wanted to take you to. looking back at the title of what the PowerPoint, so I think it's our duty when Susanna and others are fighting, indigenous people are fighting in our home nations and indigenous lands, it's our duty to literally wage war on these ideologies from the place where they were given birth to, and to bring them on their knees there. Because that's the only way there could be any sense of global solidarity, is that we don't try and be capitalist with a black skin or with a brown skin, that we literally wage war where it's supposed to be waged. And that's the only way you can really have a form of structural change. And as written by on the grave of like a former Sierra Leonean chief, it's written in Creole, but it translated, it means, I wish that my kids that would go to where these people are coming from, these people meaning Brits, and that my kids would do to them what they have done to us in our own nations, so that we can restore justice. So yeah, that's the point I'm coming from, and that's how I've been able to like engage in this topic from like an Islamic and being black, and those two things coming together to really help me realize what my role can be in this whole dimension.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think you brought together pretty much all the threads that were laid out. So thank you for doing my job for me. But in all sincerity, I think you brought together not only the global North ties or the kind of global North centricism of the environmentalist conversation, but where the disconnect actually is between the anti-racism, decolonial, and environmental conversation, in the sense that in the environmentalism conversation, as Malcolm points out, there is not an acknowledgement of modernity's, the double fracture that he highlights, the colonial impact that modernity has had on the globe and has had on all people. And therefore, without that kind of acknowledgement, without the acknowledgement of what colonialism has done, how it has racialized some people, and by that racialization, created a hierarchy of people where some are worth being listened to and some others are worth being extracted from, we cannot yet get to a place where we can meaningfully relate to one another across those lines, which is why we see this disconnect within Black communities, within anti-racist and decolonial communities, from not necessarily environmentalism and ecology, but specifically from the white communities that will protest and will advocate for dolphins over and above the people that they have extracted from in order to facilitate the construction of the civilizations that they have created for themselves in the global north. Before we go forward, I want to once again remind everyone that if you do have questions, you are more than welcome to put them in the, I'm going to say in the chat function, not in the Q&A function, because I actually do not have access to the Q&A function. I just realized. So if there are questions in the Q&A function, you know where to put them in the Google document, and I will share them with everyone. Just make sure that you name yourself, your pronouns, and where it is, who it is that you are asking your question to, and where it is in the globe that you are coming from. But before we get to that moment, I wonder if there are any questions from inside the studio? Spotlight, spotlight. Fatih, it looks like something's burning for you. Not yet? Percolating, percolating. I wonder, before we go to the questions from the Q&A, if I want to hear a little bit from Malcolm, because Mohammed has kind of detailed for us a little bit of how the disconnect has taken place between the anti-racism, decolonization movements and the environmentalist movement. And I wonder from you, from the perspective of decolonial ecologies, are there any steps of remedy that you have outlined within your thesis of decolonial ecology between that rift, between Black communities, between indigenous communities, between the anti-racist and decolonial movements, and the overwhelming whiteness of the environmental movement and the ecological movement?
Well, first of all, I'm very humbled and very happy to share the stage with Susanna and Mohammed, and I learned already a lot from this talk. So So thank you. And actually, I was thinking, what links us, Susanna, Mohamed, and at least and me in the panel, and there is a story of colonization and slavery that is thread. If I go back to this founding moment of modernity, the colonization meant also the domination of many indigenous people, like the Ashanikas that Susanna represents. And I mean, Mohamed didn't say this, but a part of Sierra Leone was also founded after some escaped runaways enslaved from the Americas were found their ways to Africa, and two countries were created, Sierra Leone and Liberia. So some of my ancestors that were enslaved in the Americas may have found their way in the country that Mohamed knows and love, and that's a common thread that we have. Now, in terms of your question, what should we do or what are the steps? I think the type of work that Susanna and Mohamed are doing are already works in themselves. And there are different spaces where the work needs to be done. Now, I am of the opinion that it's, okay, there is a misconception into what we mean or what I mean by decolonizing ecology. And I talk about decolonial ecology, not the decolonization of already existing structures. What I mean by that is the idea for me is not for Greenpeace, for WWF, for already existing institutions to just paint their walls with different colors, have a few black people, indigenous people in their boardroom. Because this, paradoxically, you could do a decolonization of the institution and still maintain the same colonial bias towards the indigenous people. So I mean there is a need for source point of discourses. And we need to be clear that the North does not have the monopoly on the discourses of ecological issues or climate change, or and I think it's an idea that is not so easy to accept by some, because they will be quick, like in France it's very similar. They will be quick to say, well, because you raise anti-racist or claims, you are the one dividing us. You are the one doing a separation in the face of the climate tempest and so on and so forth. So of course, this is a trick to quiet us. This is a trick to silence us. So we need to be mindful of that. And what Mohamed was telling about the idea of I can't breathe, referring also to the worldwide movements of 2020 in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. We had something similar, and Mohamed knows this as well, in Paris, where there was the first time a joint gathering with a climate movement and an anti-racist movement in the committee Adama Traoré. And so such steps are very important, both on the activist movement, but also on the ideas that it raises. The idea that I wish or I want that in a few years, it would be no longer acceptable to frame climate justice without talking about racism, without talking about emancipation, without talking about equality north-south and so on. The other point I want to raise about Susanna's presentation, which of course I totally support, and I was also heart shaken by the stories. And it is also sad or revolting that the stories of the Ashaninka are one stories of many other peoples, especially in South America, but also in Africa and in Asia, that are basically enduring the consequences that are hidden from the eyes of the Europeans or the people in the North. And what I've noticed is that there is even a sometimes institutions and groups that I've met in France have welcomed indigenous peoples, but I've talked about them in a way, in the form of some exoticism. That means, oh, look at the people, they are suffering under the liberalism, capitalism. Oh, we should really do something. But in doing so, they do not acknowledge the relationships, as Mohamed said, between our own mode of consumption, of living, that find its way and support the violence that is imposed on the Ashnikas and other groups of the world. And so we need to, and this exoticism, I call it the fact that you have sympathy with the others, but without recognizing that you are implicated in that. And so because you are implicated, that means that you have the possibility to act also, to act here, but in order to show solidarity there. And this is the type of message I think we should take from Susanna's and Mohamed, but also from presentation, that the actions for climate change do not need to be far away. It starts right here, right now, not in the future, right now, right here.
Thank you so much, Malcolm, for that robust answer. I'm wondering, from Susanna's perspective, what do you feel like the international community that are listening to you speak today, what is it that we can do for your community from where we are?
Buenas. Ya, sí, gracias. Muchas gracias. Bueno, necesitamos, hermanos, necesitamos que nos ayuden a conseguir la titulación de nuestras comunidades nativas. Necesitamos financiamiento para hacer realidad la titulación de las comunidades nativas en Atalaya. No solamente es Pavo, donde yo presido, también existen otras organizaciones a nivel del Perú que necesitan ser tituladas, que esos financiamientos sean entregadas directas a organizaciones indígenas a nivel local, porque eso es dinero que va a llegar al Estado para que se haga realidad la titulación. Aquí ya hemos experimentado, hay que esperan 20 años, 15 años, no son tituladas, aparte de que la cooperación internacional les da dinero al Estado para titular, sin embargo, lo desvían para otras cosas y nos afecta a nosotros. Y al afectarnos a nosotros, afecta a la conservación de nuestros bosques, afecta a la vida de muchas que sin ellos nosotros tampoco no somos nadie. Sin el bosque nosotros no somos nadie. Por eso pedimos a la cooperación internacional, a ustedes, hermanos, también decirle a nuestro presidente Pedro Castillo que sea flexible, que sea razonable, que priorice la atención a los pueblos originarios, que nosotros somos los verdaderos conservadores de los bosques, los que vamos a garantizar una vida sana, plena, para nosotros y para todo el mundo. No hay más, no hay otra cosa más hacer, ni tampoco tiempo que perder, porque mañana más tarde va a ser muy tarde, hermanos. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you for the question. So in fact, we need to be helped and supported to obtain our land titles. This is the first thing. And for this, we need financing, funding, because it is not only the organization of FABU, there are other indigenous federations all over Peru which are demanding the same thing, soliciting land titles. And they also need this financing because the land titling has never been paid for by the government. We have been waiting 15 or 20 years for our titles and nothing has happened. At times, the international cooperation did give money, but then it was used for other things by the government. It never arrived where it was supposed to go. If we do not obtain this land titling very fast, then our forest will be gone forever. And without the forest, we are nobody, in fact. Therefore, we hope that by international pressure and international support, our president will also listen to us and prioritize the needs of the indigenous communities of Peru. There is no time to lose, my brothers and sisters, because tomorrow it is already too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. So for those listening at home, you heard it here first. Please find a way to support indigenous communities, not only in the Amazon, not only in Peru, but in the entirety of the Global South, on finding ways to support them financially so that they can do the important work on the ground. Because it is because of the extraction that our brothers and sisters and theys and thems in the Global South have experienced that we are able to experience the privilege that we experience here in the Global North. So it is paramount as a gesture of reparation, as a gesture of decolonial ecology and justice to ensure that we are ensuring that we get that capital to our brothers and sisters and theys and thems in the Global South, in these indigenous communities, so that they can do the work on the ground where the extraction is taking place. So thank you so much, Susanna, for that profound answer. And finally, I want to go to our final speaker for the night, Mohammed. What are some of the final takeaways that you would like the audience to take away from what you have offered to us tonight?
Yeah, thanks. While I was listening to like Malcolm and Susanna again, I was just thinking about had a very interesting encounter here in Cambridge with students that are fighting against Harvard land grabs internationally. So across the globe, universities are very, very, very rich. To put into perception, Harvard has more money than maybe 25 countries in the world. So they have basically, if they would have a GDP, it would be 53 billion. Sorry. So that means Harvard can't be rich without doing some dodgy stuff. So there's no way possible to have that amount of money without doing some dodgy stuff. So students have found out only 1 to 3% where that money is going to. And in that 1 to 3%, they've found out that the university is investing in land grabs. So basically pushing practices like in indigenous lands, basically just buying land, cultivating it, and then selling it to whoever wants to buy it without any form of accountability, but also investing in prison industrial complex. So I think what would be very interesting if there are people listening that are part of student unions and so on and so forth, is to maybe locally go and look at what's your university doing, who do they have relations to that might be actually doing some hideous stuff in the world. For instance, what we know historically is how student bodies helped to put apartheid South Africa on his knees just from really pushing, boycotting certain ties universities had with apartheid South Africa. And this is what I meant when I was saying that to defeat empire in empire, because it was this form of international pressure that helped bring certain changes on a local level, while people locally were already fighting the fight, but they also needed that essential part. That's why, for instance, I think the South African government had to get rid of someone as Stephen Bantu Biko, because obviously that was his whole game of getting international solidarity from students. So I think it's how we can position ourselves in the institutions we're part of to make sure these institutions are not financing research or funding whatever it is that's basically endangering the lives of other people. That's one part. And if there is something I really want people to take from this, and this is especially to people that are in environmental movements, is that you are never going to get support from Black and brown people in Europe if you don't enter their spaces, if you don't show that you truly care for the communities they are in, and not from like a paternalistic perception of like, we want to help you, but really help them fight certain structural racism in our own lands. If you're not able to show that commitment to them, they will never show you that commitment in the global us Malcolm was talking about. They will not show you that commitment because historically speaking, Black people are just wary of white people asking them for help, because we know afterwards white people will take off all the benefits and kick you back where you belong. So I think you need to show us that you are different, that you've learned from these histories, and then we will indeed engage in this global change that's really it's needed. So it's like this two-way stream of like students having to engage the institutions and hold them accountable, white institutions to really, and institutions as in those that fight for like climate and climate justice, to really locally get involved with the Black and brown organizations from like a very humbling perspective. And then you can create these coalitions that are like in Paris, that are able to push through much harder, because you have you have so much more power and so many more voices that you're coming from. So I think those are like the two things I would really want to push forward.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. For those listening at home and for those in the studio, we've heard it here from our fantastic speakers, some of the ways that we can directly benefit those who are experiencing extraction in the global south, but actually the whole world, in fact, is by taking accountability of the ways in which the global north has extracted from the global south and finding context-specific local ways to give back, to repatriate and repair the extractive relationship that has been established by colonialism that is extending to the present day. If you are living in Belgium, you can look no further than Green Dean Visitwe if you would like to make a financial contribution, or Voom Visitwe. They're working specifically at the intersection of racialized people here in Belgium and environmentalism and activism, not only for racialized people, but for the environment and for the globe as we know it. If you are a member of a colonial society, you can look at the colonial territories that your previously colonial territory extracted from, and you can find ways not only to give land taxes, but to donate directly to the people that are working on the ground in order to achieve justice from the legacies that were established by previous colonial administrations. I would encourage all of us to think about the specific ways in which we can contribute to the very, very urgent matter, not only of the ecological crisis, but our societal and species crisis on this planet at the moment. Mother Nature will be fine, but the human race will not if we do not take action very soon. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this edition of Toestanden. I want to give a huge, huge thank you to our fantastic speakers, Malcolm Ferdinand, Mohammed Bari, Susana Silva Morales. Thank you so much, so much, so much, so much for joining us and giving us such extensive and rigorous, not only discourse, but heartfelt insights into the work that you are doing from your specific localities. I want to give a great thank you to Melanie Zadare, who is doing the translation for Susana, and Mira van der Meulen, who is doing the translation for us here in the studio. Once again, if you'd like to hear more about the Ashananka Federation, you can read Mira's article on mo.be, that is mo.be. Type in Mira van der Meulen and you'll be able to find the article about the Ashananka Federation. Thank you to all our partners who have been able to make this possible today. Thank you once again to the technical team in the back who you cannot see, who have been doing fantastic work to make all of this happen. Thank you to Kuntakinte Island for providing all of what we see before us today, as well as the fantastic catering. And thank you to you for being here tonight, for joining us for this conversation. And until next time, I hope you have a fantastic evening thinking about what you can do, not only for yourself, but for the planet. Have a good evening. Until the next.